Hey guys, this is gonna be a new type of video I'm posting on here. I'm actually a writer and I write stories, and I figured I'd just read out the story to you. Here we go. This story is called Learning, and is about a character of mine named Grizz. A quiet rainfall tapped rhythmically against each leaf, singing a song of change. The heavy leather boots strapped to Grizz's legs slapped heavily against the thick mud. His animal ear twitched to the sound of a single rockfall. He was here, after yet another decade. Rustling through the damp pouch lazily strapped over his shoulder, he located the rune and held it up towards the cliff face. A brilliant, life-filled green drew itself across the cliff face, turning the stone to a gateway, and beyond it were an elf and a dwarf. A shimmer shot across Grizz's eyes as he walked through the passage. The stone trickled back and hid the entrance once more. The two figures in front of him held a lazy smile that reached to their ears. Pains throughout years of life tried holding them back, but they shone like shimmering constellations. Grizz let out a heavy huff, dropping his damp bag to the earthen floor. With a wet pop, "Ma, ba," Grizz said tentatively. They were both adorned with pounds upon pounds of hides and furs, and the light candlelight gave a dim yet welcoming warmth. The grizzled dwarf's eyes hardly opened, yet they were painted with joy. "Yes, Grizz, it is us." Grizz sat down in front of them. A flame highlighted his red cheeks and silky brown hair. He prodded at a stone on the floor. "Limestone," he muttered. The dwarf chuckled. "Good eye." His voice was hoarse, but it carried a contagious jolliness to it. "It's been quite some time. I see you have found what was left for ye." His eyes wandered towards the rune, still faintly shimmering. Grizz gently shook the rune. "Yeah." His eyes loosened from their stiff seriousness to a somber, almost lonely droop. "Ma, pa, am I a monster?" Grizz scraped his claw against the stone floor lightly. The dwarf's smile loosened slightly, and he looked up towards the well-adorned elf. She knowingly looked down, then back to Grizz. "Nay, Grizz, just told you were. I can see it." She reached a lanky arm towards Grizz's chin and lifted it to meet her gaze. "How about a story, son?" Grizz held the gaze for a moment. Her eyes glimmered with a natural beauty. It was the same mana that flowed through him. "Sure, I suppose." His shoulder loosened. She retracted her hand and rested upon her lap. "You know of the bird folk and the mer folk, aye?" she began. "Aye." Grizz remembered a distinct interaction betwixt the two races. First their faces, then the color of their blood. "I know too well." "Well, there was once a bird folk who managed to find himself being raised by the merfolk. He could swim, catch fish, and even fly, though the merfolk hated the bird folk. His ma and pa were adopted, and he learned to not only hate the bird folk, but hate himself." Elf continued. "His peers and friends treated him like them, yet would openly give spite and say vile things of the bird folk. At that time, he never felt so alone. The people who seemed to accept him hated the one thing he couldn't change, and thus he hated the bird folk for existing." Gris scoffed quietly. "Sounds familiar." The elf looked at him sorrowfully, but continued. "The other bold folk hated him too, you see. They thought him a traitor, a monster, a freak. He would kill his own kind to be with the very thing they saw as an enemy." Gris furrowed his brow at the statement. "Ma, what is your point?" he growled. The elf smiled quietly. "The point being, no person is born good, bad, or evil. It matters not the height of their stature or the tint of their skin. They learn what to hate and fear. A bird folk could be taught he be a mistake just for living." The elf looked at Grizz in his eyes now. "The same as a dwarf can be called a monster for being part animal. It's up to you to decide whether or not you will listen to these ones, or break this cycle and learn for yourself." They both smiled reassuringly towards Grizz. Dwarf spoke up. So what do you choose, son? Gris thought to himself for a moment. Thought of the bird folk and the merfolk who had killed each other just because they were told the other was wrong. He thought how he hated himself for decades just because travelers called him a name. He had learned to hate himself, just as the bird folk and the merfolk had learned how to hate each other. I think I'll learn for myself, Gris finally said, a new sparkle in his eyes. The elf chuckled lightly. Then we have no more to teach you. Come back with stories, son. She brushed her long hands and claws through Gris's hair, pulling away after a moment. Gris sat up, took his bag, and tossed it over his shoulder. I will. Stay safe. Bye. Bye. He held the rune towards the stone, and it melted away. Looked back one last time. We will, son. The dwarf spoke up one more time before the stone returned to its natural state.